What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be taking another look at Magicka Sorcerers, but this time we're going to be doing what we're going to call the Easy Sorc build here. So this is going to be more of a beginner oriented build. So this build is designed around a couple of things, a couple of assumptions that I've made. First assumption that I made is that I'm assuming that you are a base game player, so you only have access to sets that you would be able to get from the base game. Sets, skills, anything that requires you to have either ESO Plus or to purchase the latest expansion, that's out. The second thing is I am assuming that you aren't really going to go for very high-end vet trials. So we're basically more or less trying to maximize our overall DPS on kind of this assumption that we don't have access to a lot of the better sets in the game, like False God's Devotion. We don't have access to jewelry crafting, don't have access to transmutation, so we can't transmute our jewelry, and so on. And our kind of goal behind this build is basically what is the easiest rotation that I can give you guys that will still pull DPS that is acceptable for vet trials, while at the same time keeping it as simple and as easy to obtain as possible in terms of gear. This is the build that I came up with. So this build video will have gear, skills, everything that you need to know to recreate this build, just because this is a kind of very specifically created build, crafted build for those of you guys who just want to start getting into vet trials. I will just give you this caveat here, this sort of word of wisdom, kind of. While this is a good build to get things started, you will eventually want to shift more towards a more meta-oriented build, a light attack-oriented build, if you intend on progressing further than the veteran Craglorn trials. If you want to get into things like veteran Halls of Fabrication, veteran Sunspire, the hard mode Craglorn trials, at that point, this build will start to show its cracks, and that is when you want to shift over to a more traditional meta build. So while this build is definitely going to be more than enough to get you through the vet Craglorns, the probably VMAW as well, maybe Cloud Rest and Asylum, the veteran versions, the like +0 versions of those trials. If you intend on going farther than that, I do recommend you guys kind of do some of your own research, take a look at other builds, learn how to weave light attacks into your rotation, things like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So again, I'm working under the assumption that you guys only have access to base game sets. You don't have access to any sort of jewelry crafting stuff. So sets like Undaunted Infiltrator from Arc's Corinium, those sets are out because you do need to be able to transmute the jewelry because it is a medium armor set. This does limit us a little bit here, but I still came up with a pretty decent build here. So for our gear, our Monster Helm set is going to be Ilambris. We do have sources of both flame and shock damage, so we should be able to get these procs going pretty much on cooldown. This can be replaced with something like Grothdarr instead if you want to get some more cleave damage out of the way, or you can just do something very simple, which is just 2 one-piece crit sets. So that'd be something like wearing 1-piece Slimecraw with 1-piece Ice Heart or something. Finally, if you are working towards getting into like a beginner trials group, chances are your Mind and Berserk uptime's not that great. So in that instance, you would probably want to wear Slimecraw instead. So all of these pieces can be obtained just in the base game. So Ilambris can be obtained from Crypt of Hearts, Slimecraw, Crypt of Hearts 1 I should say. Slimecraw can be obtained from Wayward Sewers 1. So 2 very simple dungeons. Grothdarr can be obtained from Vaults of Madness, another fairly easy dungeon in the base game. And then for crit sets, you already have Slimecraw, you have Ice Heart. If you're going for shoulders, you can even just go for Zahn from the chest piece, from the Undaunted chest even. So it's pretty easy to get 2 one-piece crit sets as well. So all the Monster Helm sets that I mentioned, you can get from just base game dungeons. The next set is going to be your body set. So we are running 2 5-piece sets. Again, because we're assuming you only have access to the base game sets, you won't have access to the Maelstrom Staff. And besides, the Maelstrom Staff is a little bit more advanced for what this build is kind of oriented towards. So we're running with the new crafted set, New Moon Acolyte. I know this is a 9-trait set. How is this possible to put on a beginner build? Well, you can buy it, or you can farm for materials and get somebody to craft it for you. I myself, for example, am a master crafter, and as long as somebody provides me with the materials that they need to craft their sets, I'm more than happy to go out of my way to craft a set for new players. So even though this is a 9 trait set, you can buy it off guild traders. You can commission someone to get it to craft it for you because it is tradable. So in that regard, even though yes, you will need to go do something elsewhere if you want to craft it yourself, because it's tradable, you can't get it from base game. So we're keeping this in here. New Moon Acolyte is definitely the way to go. We're using a heavy tech build, so the increased cost of our abilities doesn't really matter to us too much. Get a bunch of weapon damage, get some spell pen so we can shift our CB points around. Spell damage, spell crit, all solid set bonuses. You can also go with something like Julianos instead, which is basically a weaker version of New Moon Acolyte, but New Moon Acolyte is definitely going to be one of the strongest sets that you can run on this build. Then our second set is going to be Mother's Sorrow. This is another base game set from Deshawn, so you can farm this yourself or you can buy it because it is an overland set. So you can just farm for it yourself or buy it off guild traders. So pretty easy to obtain. You have the jewelry pieces here and lightning and Inferno staff. Now because Mother's Sorrow is a light armor set and New Moon Acolyte is a crafted set, you can play around with however you want to put these around. So for example, if you got 2 light armor pieces for Ilambris, then you can craft 1 heavy New Moon Acolyte and 1 medium New Moon Acolyte to maintain your 5/1/1 armor set bonus. Same thing with weapons. Weapons, generally speaking, are going to be the most expensive things to buy on any set. So Mother's Sorrow, Inferno, Lightning Stabs, for example, which we have here, can be a little bit tricky to obtain if you don't have the money to buy it, or you don't have the patience or the time to farm it. In which case, you can just run New Moon Acolyte instead. Just go ahead and craft those weapons instead. But you will notice that we are running a Lightning Staff on the front bar and an Inferno Staff on the back bar. I already talked about Ilambris. You have sources of both flame and shock damage. So the Inferno Staff is going to be infused with a shock damage enchant on the back bar. And on the front bar you have an infused Lightning Staff with a flame damage enchant. So both infused, both with enchants. Doesn't really matter which one has which, so you can put the shock damage on the front and the flame damage on the back. Doesn't really matter overall in the end, as long as you have those 2 different damage enchants. For our jewelry, again, we are assuming you don't have access to jewelry crafting, so you don't have access to transmute your jewelry into other traits, so we have to stick with light armor sets that have Arcane. We have Arcane traits and spell damage enchants. Doing a heavy attack build, so don't need to worry about any sort of regen. In armor, all the vines, all max Magicka, it's pretty cut and dry. Because we're using a heavy attack build, don't gotta worry about running sustained food, so we can run blue food, so don't have to worry about health. You can even see here our health is sitting at 19,000 before Ebon and before minor toughness. So we're in pretty good shape in terms of health, so don't really need to run any sort of health glyphs or anything. So this is definitely going to be the strongest setup here. There are obviously some other sets you can run. For example, Mechanical Acuity, Julianos. These are all either craftable or overland sets you could run. So don't feel like you have to be constrained to this particular gear setup, but this is what I found to be the most effective overall. In terms of character sheet stuff, Dark Elves and High Elves are going to be your best friends if you're going to maximize your overall DPS. High Elves get 2,000 Magicka, 258 spell damage. Dark Elves get 258 spell damage and 1875 max Magicka. Where they differ is their secondary bonuses. So Dark Elves get 1875 max stamina as well as 258 weapon damage. So if you want to do a stam sork on the side, then Dark Elves are a really solid option there. High Elves get some additional stamina back if you're Magicka DPS, or Magicka if you're stamina DPS back. So you kind of get a little bit of additional regen on your off resource. This might make a difference if you want to PvP with this toon, because obviously stamina is very important in Cyrodiil and PvP in general. Also, if you want to get into even more advanced tactic and start learning how to bash weave, getting the additional stamina back will also help you there as well. Those are the 2 races that I would recommend running for this particular setup here. You can always go something like Breton if you'd like, so that's 2,000 max Magicka, 7% cost reduction to Magicka abilities, and 100 Magicka regen, but you're giving up some DPS ceiling. So I wouldn't usually recommend running Breton if you're going to go with a build like this. 64 points into Magicka here. Again, heavy attack build, don't gotta worry about health because we're running blue food, so no real reason to put points into health. We also have some additional health from our pets as well. Shadow Mundus, still the strongest Mundus, regardless of whether what kind of build you're running. We are running Mother Sorrow, so we definitely have enough crit chance to take advantage of the crit damage that the Shadow provides. Then blue food, max Magicka, and max health. For our skill bars, on our front bar we have Haunting Curse. You can also use Daedric Prey if you'd prefer. The DPS difference between the two of them are going to be pretty small. They did nerf Daedric Prey in Dragonhold, so it's not quite as effective, which is why Haunting Curse is pushing a little bit ahead. Then you have your two pets, Volatile Familiar and Twilight Tormentor. Then for our front bar you have Bound Aegis, Inner Light. This is just to help boost our max Magicka as much as we can get it up, so to help boost our pet damage while we're on our front bar. And then Greater Storm Atronach. You can also run Shooting Star instead, or if you need some sort of like an AoE attack, then AoE ultimate I should say, then you can just run Suppression Field instead, which is a pretty nice ultimate for AoE damage. Then for our back bar, we have Mystic Orb and then Barbed Trap for the Minor Force. You are not able to be within melee range. Again, we're assuming you only have access to the base game stuff, so no challenge acceleration for us. You'd run the other morph, which is Lightweight Beast Trap. Minor Force is a very powerful buff, so you want to make sure to grab it wherever you can, and the only way to get it from the base game is through Barbed Trap or Lightweight Beast Trap. So you want to run one or the other. Barbed Trap being the preferred source of Minor Force, as opposed to Lightweight Beast Trap just because of the duration. Then we have Unstable Wall of Fire, then we have our two pets again, and Greater Storm Atronach again. So that's pretty much it. If you want to add in a shield, you can take out Mystic Orb, add in your shield, which in this case would be your Empowered Ward or Hardened Ward. If you want to add in a source of Major Sorcery, you can replace Mystic Orb with Degeneration, or you can replace Haunting Curse with Degeneration under the Mage's Guild line. Degeneration will give you your Major Sorcery there. If you want another heal and Major Sorcery, then you can run Critical Surge instead, which will give you your Major Sorcery as well as some healing done whenever you deal a critical hit. So if you want both the heal and the sorcery, Critical Surge is the way to go. And again, you'd replace something like Haunting Curse or Mystic Orb on the front on your bars. You can even take out Bound Aegis or Inner Light for any of these abilities too, if you want to go that route. But generally speaking, if you only really need a shield or a self-heal. You don't really need both in trials. As long as you have a shield, Magicka DPS, you should be able to survive pretty decently well. So if anything, I would probably just take out Mystic Orb and just replace that with a shield instead. Alternatively, what you can do is you can actually take out one of your pets here. So I'd take out Volatile Familiar, for example, and replace Volatile Familiar. If I go ahead and take it out here, I'd actually replace Volatile Familiar on the back bar with Lightning Flood, then Surge or Shield or whatever have you on the front bar here. You can go that route instead if you prefer. So for example, here, say, you would put down either Critical Surge, or you would put down your Shield, Empowered Ward, to put right here, or Degeneration if you don't want to give up any sort of DPS, but still want that Major Sorcery, so you don't have to use Spell Power Potions. But you would be giving up a Self-Heal if you're not using, if you're using Degeneration. So that's the kind of the way that you can kind of get around all that sort of stuff. But we will put our back on, summon him, and do our parse. Now moving on to CPs. The CP cap is 810, so we're assuming that you're at max CP. Obviously, those of you guys who are running this build probably aren't at max CP. But this should give you an idea of where you want to distribute your CPs though. For your green CPs, the two most important nodes are going to be Arcanist and Tenacity. You want to get up to 100 Arcanist as quickly as you can for additional Magicka regen. While this is a heavy attack build and you don't necessarily need the regen, eventually you might want to move on to a light attack build, in which case you do want to get that Arcanist bonus there. But if you don't want to put points in Arcanist, because again, it's a heavy attack build, no need to worry about sustain, you can really shift green points really however you'd like. Then I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, 33 Warlord. You guys should be familiar with this from my other build videos. Blue CPs are going to be a little bit different because we are using New Moon Acolyte, which does have a spell pen bonus. So we're actually able, assuming that we get all of our debuffs, we actually are able to meet the pen cap without putting any points into spell erosion. So obviously, if you are running this build, chances are you're running with a team that does not have very good Alkash uptime or very good Torx Crusher uptime, so you might want to shift some points into spell erosion anyways to kind of make up for those loss in uptime. 66 Elfborn, 64 Elemental Expert. We have 1 in the Spell Erosion, and that's just because we just had 1 leftover point when we hit our jump points. 25 Elemental Expert, 66 Master at Arms, and 48 into Thaumaturge. And over here into the blue CPs, the most important thing to get first is going to be Spell Precision for the additional spell crit. So I would probably focus in on getting Ele Expert Elfborn up first, and then start focusing over here into Master at Arms, Staff Expert, and you can tell that Thaumaturge is probably the lowest priority just because it has the least amount of points. Also, Staff Expert is also kind of last priority as well. In our red CPs, going for the balanced approach, so 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 with Hardy and Elemental Defender. As you are leveling things up, you obviously won't be able to hit all these jump points here. Generally speaking, you're going to want to evenly split between Hardy and Elemental Defender if you're going for a balanced approach, and focus more on Ironclad than you would Thick Skin here. Generally speaking, direct damage is going to be more dangerous than damage over time. And of course, for specific trials, you will want to shift some red CP points around to kind of best mitigate the type of damage that you'll be experiencing in that trial. For example, AA, you have a lot of magic damage, versus Sanctum Ophidia, where you're dealing more mixed. You have both magic and physical damage in there. So that is all the build information. Now for the rotation. So the rotation, it's a heavy attack rotation. They're pretty simple, but still going to be a little bit dynamic, and that's just because the duration of our dots don't really line up very well. But if you want, you could run a static rotation instead. You will end up giving up some uptime on some of your dots, so you will be doing a little bit less DPS, but that's kind of the trade-off you'd be making if you decide to go static and keep things simple compared to dynamic. So rotation itself, pretty straightforward. So you have, obviously, your Minor Force, your source of Minor Force, so Barbed Trap or Lightweight Beast Trap. You want to start off with that. Just put down all your dots here, including Tormentor. And just heavy attack, so you need to renew your dots. Straightforward here. This is a dynamic rotation here. Depending on kind of where you all end up falling with your dot rotation. So again, that's the dynamic rotation. Now for the static rotation instead. So we're just gonna let all the dots fall off here, just so we can start with static rotation. So dynamic rotation again is just keeping an eye on all your dots and just use them as you go along. Static rotation means you will not be changing your rotation at all for whatever reason. So it's just the same order, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So in this instance, starting with our back bar again, your back bar dots actually line up pretty decently well. So you have 10, 10, 10. Barbed Trap is 18, but if you're using Lightweight Beast Trap, that's also 10. Tormentor is 15. The advantage of this build, though, is that because you have double bar or pet, it doesn't really matter which bar you activate this on. So the only odd one out would be Haunting Curse. So for the static rotation, let's do 2 heavy attacks. Do 1 heavy attack. 2 heavy attacks. 2 heavy attacks. Do your 3 dots on the back bar. The stack rotation here is still a little bit dynamic. Basically what you're doing is you're simplifying your back bar rotation here, and then the only dots you really have to worry about then are going to be Haunting Curse and Twilight Tormentor. Basically with the static rotation, you're giving up a little bit of uptime Minor Force from Barbed Trap. As you can see here, you give up a little bit of time on Minor Force from Trap, but it does simplify your back bar rotation. So basically what you do is you do Trap every second time you're on your back bar, that just leaves Twilight Tormentor and Haunting Curse, which have some of the odd timers, so you would just kind of keep an eye on those and re-up those as necessary. So still a little bit of dynamic, but it does sort of simplify the rotation, so you don't have to swap, hit trap, swap back to a heavy attack, and all that stuff. Alright, but that is it for kind of the explanation. Now here is a 21 million dummy parse, or to get an idea of the amount of DPS this can pull. So remember, this is a beginner build. We don't have Bloodthirsty Jewels, we don't have Minor Slayer, or anything like that. So the DPS output of this build is not going to be as high as the standard beta builds. That'd be kind of foolish to think that you'd be able to pull that amount of DPS. But this should give you an idea of how much DPS you actually are able to pull in an actual trial. So let's go ahead and get started here. Hopefully my pets don't do anything stupid. So I am using spell power potions. Why you don't see me running things like Surge or Regeneration here. Once we hit 50% health, obviously we will drop the active ability of Twilight Tormentor. Twilight Tormentor doesn't do any sort of anything special once you hit 50% or below. Dummy here is actually a little bit closer to the wall, so we're not getting quite as much DPS as we possibly could get from Mystic Orbs. So the DPS at the end of this parse is actually should be a little bit higher, just because again we're not getting as many ticks as we possibly can out of Mystic Orb. For larger bosses, like if you're doing the dragons in Sunspire or St. Holmes in Asylum, you can easily get all 20 ticks of Mystic Orb to go off. Just because of the size of the boss's hitbox. So a few interesting things about New Acolyte. It does actually increase the cost of your ultimate. You guys might have noticed that my H ulti actually cost 180 ultimate rather than the usual 170. That's because I am running with an Acolyte. A couple of things I do want to point out here with some of these. First, with Haunting Curse. Make sure you're letting Haunting Curse run all the way out so you get that second explosion. Don't re-up it too early. Otherwise, you won't be letting that second explosion go off. Make sure you see that second explosion go off before you recast it. That's thing one. Thing two is to make sure you actually let your heavy attack completely run out before you bar swap at all with it. You know you're finished because we'll jerk your staff back. We're at 50%, so that's the last time we use our Twilight Tormentor. Just make sure you are completely finishing that heavy attack. A little bit of a trick for you guys as well. While you're in the middle of a heavy attack animation, you can actually queue up your next ability. I'll just kind of show you here. So I'm hitting there. I was hitting the familiar button. What that basically does is once you are done with the heavy attack animation, you will immediately do whatever ability you have queued up. Just a little hint for you guys to kind of get your builds off a little bit faster. example here, I can just hit Haunting Curse. And as soon as my heavy attack animation is over, it'll cast Haunting Curse for me. You will notice that I am light attack weaving in between all my abilities. I do recommend that everybody kind of pick up and learn how to light weave. It just helps improve your overall DPS. It also helps prepare you for if you eventually want to go deeper into endgame trials for those kind of builds, because light attack weaving is very important for those stereotypical builds that you see on like Nico's channel and my own. You did see that our DPS did go down, and that's because Sorks have a reverse execute in their class passive, which is kind of silly if you ask me. But it does mean you will do higher DPS when the boss has more health, and low DPS when the boss has less health. Lower DPS is going down instead of up because of execute, and we're not bloodthirsty, I should say. We're not using our execute, and yeah. So it's not a big surprise that our DPS is going down towards the end here. Alright, so there we go. That is the Easy Sork. Again, a very easy build to pick up. The set pieces are fairly easily obtainable, if a little bit expensive to obtain, and it does pretty decent DPS. So we're pulling 58.2k DPS. They gave you an idea. The heavy attack pet build that I had, I believe this is elsewhere when I last updated, it was pulling around 63.2k DPS. So about in line with what you would expect to see in terms of amount of DPS drop from Dragonhold due to changes to dots, so about a 5k drop or so. So still really respectable. And again, the sets that we have here are fairly easy to obtain. Ilambris is a fairly easy dungeon, Crypt of Hearts 1. Human Acolyte's craftable, so you can just get someone to craft it for you. And then Mother's Sorrow, it's a base game set, it's been around for a while. It is on a more expensive side, but you can just kind of pick up pieces as you go. You can farm for pieces. There's actually a quest that you can get, an infused lightning staff, so you can get 2 lightning staffs if you'd like. Just swap your Inferno backbar with the lightning staff and just run, for example, Grothdarr or 2 one-piece crits instead of Ilambris. So quite a few options here to get Mother Sorrow kind of on the cheap side. But that concludes this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about this build, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.